Yes.
Excellent.
Yes.
Present.
Cool. Well, welcome everybody to the first Untokening Transformative Talk webinar of 2019. We've been on a winter hiatus, and here we are in March, popping up and getting rolling again. So I'm Dr. Adonia Lugo, and I'm going to be the moderator for today's discussion, which is focused on workers in new mobility industries. So we're just double checking real quick that everybody can see and hear. We're good? Excellent.
Yep.
Awesome. So for folks who are not familiar with the Untokening Transformative Talk series, we are a collaborative virtual space where community experts can come together to connect, share, and uplift. And this webinar series was started through the Untokening, which is a multiracial collective that centers the lived experiences of marginalized communities to address mobility justice and equity. And you can go to our website, untokening.org, to learn more. And I'll go ahead and drop that in our chat box here for anyone who wants to take a look at the Untokening site. So our next Untokening convening, it's looking like will be coming up in early October, and there are more details about that coming soon. The Transformative Talks webinar series is produced from Los Angeles, where I'm located right now, by me, by social justice planner Monique Lopez of Pueblo, and with support from People for Mobility Justice Policy and Programs Organizer Rio Osha. It's been really great working with this team of the three fun people to put this series together. And as I said at the beginning, I'm Dr. Adonia Lugo, and I collaborate with Pueblo. I'm the advisory board co-chair for People for Mobility Justice, and I'm one of the core organizers with the Untokening. So we're working on making this webinar also streaming live on Facebook, but I heard from Monique that there are some technical issues going on with Facebook right now. So if it's streaming there, hello. If it's not, we'll get this video up there later on today. And folks should go ahead and feel free to use our Q&A function in Zoom, or go ahead and send a question to the group or to me directly, and we'll get into addressing some of those questions later in the webinar. But today's topic is organizing new mobility workers. So as we know, transportation is a space where there has been a history of organizing on the labor side for many, many years. A lot of transportation services have been unionized. But as we start seeing the expansion of these new mobility services, such as bike share, ride share, e-scooters, stuff like that, there are workers who are part of bringing those services to the public and providing those services in the case of rideshare. And yet we don't get to hear as much about the labor side and the worker side with how new mobility and new mobility companies come up in the media. So today's conversation is a step toward undoing that and bringing some really cool folks who've been involved in organizing new mobility workers to the fore. So I'm really happy to be joined by three panelists today. We've got Alex Carbone, who, if you're on video, you can see. We've got David Kelman, who's joining us over the phone, and Dolly Winter, who's also joining us over the phone. And I'm really glad to have you three here with us. And what we're going to do to get started is just go ahead, and I'm going to pass the mic first to, let's see, we didn't talk about speaker order. David, how do you feel about going first and telling us your story about being an organizer in the spaces you worked?
No problem. I worked at City Bike in New York from 2013 to 2016. I helped Dolly Winter organize the workforce there in about 2014. That was about a 2-year struggle, more or less. And I acted as the first chief shop steward for the shop until August of 2016. I also work. I also volunteer and help out in the cycling community, and I currently work for Jump Bicycles, which is owned by Uber.
Just had to unmute myself there. Dolly, you want to go ahead and give us your introduction and tell us about some of your background with organizing?
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dolly Winter, and I started working with City Bike. I moved up from DC with the bike share from DC up to City Bike. And through speaking with coworkers, and with David Kelman as a main organizer, we all decided that a union was definitely necessary and that this bike share was not going to be a small thing. So we, through a mutual friend, I found a contact at Transportation Workers and Union, and we, through conversation with all the coworkers, through various means of texting, talking face-to-face, and all the other ways that the tech has allowed us to communicate with everybody, we were able to have meetings and get-togethers and discuss ways to get a union started. And so through that, we raided the boss's offices, and then we were subsequently about to have an election, but the company recognized us as a union before that happened. So it was a major win. And through that, the other bike shares, DC has also come with TWU, Boston's Hubway, and also Chicago's Divvy are all with the same union, Transportation Workers Union, which is the same one the MTA uses as well. So it's a major win for those guys, and also there's some other you. Thanks for having me.
Wonderful, thank you. So I'm really excited to hear more about the background of that organizing struggle and how things came together from David and Dolly. And we're also joined by Alex Carbone, who is based here in Southern California and is here representing Rideshare Drivers United Los Angeles.
Am I up? Mm-hmm. Hi. Okay. Hi. I'm Alex, and I'm with Rideshare Drivers United. We're a group of about 2,500 rideshare drivers. That could be Uber, Lyft, or some other smaller ones. So any of those, and we're organizing drivers to. We have a whole list of demands. It's a really complicated. The bad thing is it's complicated. It's a huge company. It's worldwide. So that's kind of the difficult part. We're pretty much based in LA for the most part. We're trying to kind of branch out from there, but we're basically mostly dealing with LA issues. We've had a couple of actions so far, a couple of protests, which have gone really well. We're trying to right now get a meeting with the governor because a lot of our particular situation is associated with whether we are independent contractors or employees. And there's a lot of legislation in the courts right now, so we're trying to pressure the governor to kind of hear our voice on that and take our side on it a little bit, because Uber and Lyft are throwing millions of dollars in lobbying in every city. So that's kind of what we're focused on right now. And then another thing that just happened is they cut the rates like yesterday really badly, like 25%. Which is obviously one thing that can happen to us. We have no protection for how much money we make. They can just change it from one day to the next. And got some really bad news yesterday. So we're trying to figure out what to do about that. And that's good because that is obviously like the drivers really care about that. It's easy to get people motivated when it's about, wages. And it is a legitimate concern because a lot of times we don't even make minimum wage, or our expenses are so high too that can really be a problem, and they don't seem to really consider that. So that can motivate it, but there's a lot that goes out from there beyond just wages. We have a lot of concerns about driver caps, about what Uber does to our communities, the effect that it has on public transit, and also, of course, there's some situations where they even like towns within Los Angeles, like Monrovia, are making deals with Uber and Lyft to basically replace their public transportation. Like we're replacing bus lines. They've given a subsidy to Uber and Lyft to kind of fix that problem for them. And so obviously our jobs are not as good as like a bus driver's job, which is unionized. So that's a real concern too. So we're trying to reach out right now also and connect with other members of the community, whether they are involved with other public transport or community groups or public planning, urban planning, whatever, justice, food justice, housing justice, wherever we can kind of cross over to build a larger movement. That's part of what we're working on too.
Great, thank you for that introduction. So yeah, I don't know if Dolly, you want to go more in depth with kind of telling the story of organizing the bike share workers. Also really interested in hearing from our panelists about what have been some of the, let's see, easier groups of workers to kind of find solidarity with versus where it's been kind of tougher to make a connection because the transportation sector, isn't necessarily all tied together in the most direct way. So that's kind of like a question that's bubbling up for me. But yeah, I would love to hear more just about the organizing background.
Okay, yeah, sure. That's definitely, I think the position that I had when I worked with City Bike and the Capital Bike Share in DC was I was a dispatcher. So it's different than anything that Uber has since it's all app driven. But as a dispatcher, I had the ability to reach out to all departments. So I spoke to the managers, I spoke to the mechanics, I spoke to the drivers. So the office that I worked in, I kind of was like in the brain of the operation, which is different than the app-based, the gig economy jobs, where it's based off of your phone. So that allowed me the ability to speak to most people because I was in a shop, in a warehouse. So I had encounters with, we had technicians who would work on the stations, and then we had, drivers who would move the bikes from station to station, and then we had mechanics who would fix the bikes. So it was kind of a different, pronged kind of establishment. There's a lot of different levels that needed to be accessed. And I kind of had the ability to go to each level. So that was what made the unionizing so effective in that way. And when David and I worked together, he was very, he had the ability to see the same thing, and he could also we could see the same outcome. We could see how, if we put all of our ducks in a row, we could get to this end goal in a very effective way. And I have recently worked for Uber with another bike share with them, the Jump, and it was much. I was a contractor, and I was let go, and I could see that it was much more difficult to have. It would have been much more difficult to organize in a position like that, because even though I had the same position there as I did at City Bike, it's just, if you're a contractor, they've already leveled it out so that they have more control over you. And I just saw the article the other day about them paying out all the Los Angeles people because they wanted to keep them as subcontractors. So they're they really have a plan, and that's, I'm not too sure how that would work, but my heart goes out to you guys. But yeah, it was just, when I moved, we were trying to unionize in DC. And then when I came up to New York, I could see that the same thing still needed to happen here. And we got in touch with somebody who became our primary contact, and it was just gold. Everything worked at the right time. It was just like bowling. You just hit one and then you hit them all. So it really worked. It worked out, and we were in just a really good time for it to work out with us. And it's really frightened Lyft. Lyft has just acquired Motivate, and they did not acquire City Bike because they were concerned about them being unionized. So I mean, that speaks for itself. But it's
yeah, absolutely.
it was not easy, but it was the perseverance of everybody at City Bike at that time who had just such a drive and a willingness to push through, because they could see everything that was happening was just unjust and unfair. And so it was just you know, the love of everybody of their job, of just hard workers. And yeah, it was a great thing.
Yeah, that's great. David, do you want to add anything from your experience working on that organizing campaign?
Yeah. To elaborate a little more on what Dolly was talking about, we like one of the big benefits we had was that at the time, bike share was very new, and so launching the bike share was super disorganized. So it was very easy for us to like make organize on the low without anyone actually like knowing what we're doing. And a lot of that happened mostly because a picture you have a new industry and then you start pulling people from different industries to come head this to your management office, and it became very quickly clear that they had absolutely no idea what they were doing, but they also made, I don't know, like 25,000, 50, like twice as much as me or Dolly did, and so they were leading like as we were working operations, we were like, why are we kind of taking orders from these people, and they're kind of like they're firing people left and right, but they're still they're still trying to lean on their employees to like do managerial work, but they also still don't want to treat us treat us with respect, dignity, or not pay us very well. So it was very easy. It was very, very easy to like get support for unionization. Soon as at the outset, there was murmurs of it through different departments. But once the leaderships were quickly established between different departments, like who was in charge of like talking to people, like, oh, we're on the same page. This kind of sucks. Like, bicycles are great. We want to put bikes in the street, but the company is treating us badly. This sucks. Let's all get together and like do something about it. And it just kind of snowballed from there.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for providing some of that background. Yeah, it's really interesting the points you two are bringing up around how important it was to be there day to day, and how that allowed people to know what was going on and know more than management did about what was going on, and taking that opportunity to connect the dots and get organized. I was working in Washington, D.C. in 2014 when Capital Bike Share was working on getting organized, or rather the workers at Capital Bike Share were working on getting organized, and got to witness some of the friction there. And I remember at the time being really impressed that TWU was doing this organizing. And I wonder if you two have any insight into, was it a heavy lift to have TWU see bike share workers as a relevant workforce that they wanted to get into the union, or kind of who was making that connection? Do you have any idea about that?
You want to take this one? Well, our chief contact was head of education at TWU, Nicholas Bedell, who immediately jumped on top of the idea of like unionizing the bike share. I've learned a lot about unionization from him, and definitely I can speak for like Dolly and both, and I really thought of him as a mentor in many ways. Like, learned a lot about how to do this in the history of unionization across the country. He just saw the future. Unions are on the decline. They've been on decline for the last 50 years, and it was just like kind of no brainer that this is the future of just transportation in general. People are driving less, and they want to try to have all different transportation alternatives on the road. It would be silly for them not to jump on that. We got to meet the president of TWU at the time, John Samuelson, and it took very little convincing for them to throw resources at this.
Okay, that's good to know. Yeah, because I wonder in terms of, with I don't know how familiar everybody on the call or who's listening is with the history of labor and organizing, but it hasn't always been easy for people who are in those more established careers, kind of like how Alex was talking about, bus drivers and transit operators who are unionized already or, in good jobs with protections. It hasn't always been super straightforward or easy to get workers from those kinds of unions to see the benefit of organizing with people who have more part-time or contract-based work. So that's really cool that TWU was seeing that that need to make the connection. And I wonder, Alex, if you can tell us a little bit about the organizing challenges that Rideshare Drivers United has faced, because you don't get to have the kind of workplace where people are seeing each other and building those relationships and seeing, where the opportunity is, the way that David and Dolly were talking about.
Yeah, it's definitely challenging, both because as a driver, you don't really ever talk to other drivers. So, you might see them at the airport, you might see them at the hub, which is like a place they have a car wash and stuff. I've actually never even been there, but it's also that's also a company space. So it's kind of awkward to be, contacting people there. So a lot of our connections just come from like Facebook ads and outreach, and people find us on the internet. Or we have had some luck too, just like flyering cars, because we used to have a sticker. So we can go just at any parking lot. I usually go to like the cheap supermarket, and there's lots of Uber drivers in that parking lot. So, I can find 5 every day, stick some cards on there. So we're doing that. So those are the challenges, like not even having a company headquarters really in Los Angeles. I don't even know where that is, and not seeing the drivers on a day-to-day basis. The easy thing though is that we see riders all the time, and actually we have like the most intimate relationship with the riders. So what we're working on now is trying to have a rider wing that is people who are sympathetic, because we talk to people and people ask us a lot, like, do they pay you guys enough? Do you like driving Uber? And it's a tough question to answer. I'm always kind of like, I'm trying to get out of it. It's not really that good. So I know a lot of them like care and, want to give you a tip if we're not getting enough money and that kind of thing. So we're working on, because we can have riders approach drivers who are into it and can spread the word for us too. So that's a good way to do it. Business cards, you can get them cheap, printed for really cheap. So we can get those out, or even send people the files and they can print them out. That's some of the challenges on that front. But when I do approach people, they are pretty motivated, to and open to organizing, and I'm happy with, for the most part, how they're being treated and how much they're being paid, etc.
Yeah, a friend of mine who is a labor lawyer printed out some business cards so he could start handing them out when he's getting rides, which I think is pretty smart. So it sounds like that's a practice that's encouraged, and we could all start doing that. I wanted to share my screen real quick so folks could see the Rideshare Drivers United site's demand with the Driver's Bill of Rights, because I think it just lays out really nice and clearly what these folks are thinking about as they're coming together. And then you can also see on their website, this is the organizing model that they're using. It's you sign up, and then they get in touch with you via text, and then there's this whole process from there. So I just think y'all are doing a really interesting job of figuring out new solutions for getting people organized in the face of having this distributed workplace, which totally wasn't something I was thinking about. But when I met with one of your organizers, Ivan P., he laid that out for me, and I was like, oh my gosh, I wasn't even thinking about that challenge. But yeah. Not only are you thinking about it, dealing with it, you've actually come up with like a solid model for getting people engaged. So it's pretty impressive.
Yeah, that has worked pretty well. And what we do from there is they give us their contact information, and then we have people doing onboarding calls. It's a lot of phone banking. So that's something that we do. Also getting people out to actions. It's a lot of phone banking, but it's been working well. And from there, we also have a survey that everybody takes, and they can take the survey to say what their priorities are. So, you know, a lot of those things that you just pulled up from the driver's bill of rights came from that process. People were concerned, for instance, about deactivation. They thought that there should be, because they can deactivate us at any time. And it's like, a lot of people have car payments to drive. That's why they bought the car, and they can just be deactivated because somebody complained about them and they don't even know what happened or why, and they can't fight it. They're just deactivated. So that's one of our number one demands too, on top of like wages that always comes up really high, and everything that you see on there, it's because people rated it as a priority. So we're very democratic and driver led, and yeah, and then there's something else I was gonna say, but that's good for now. It's worked out well with tech. We've integrated it a lot, and it's been really helpful. We couldn't do it probably without it.
And one of the questions that I'm seeing from our participants are around maybe something related here to the tech question, which is how do automated and autonomous vehicles, so automation and that stuff, and this idea of connected mobility or connected shared mobility, is that something that's playing into the organizing work any of you all are doing? Is that something that comes up in the conversations or that you're strategizing around?
Are you talking about driverless cars, or sorry? What?
Yeah, anything to do with that kind of automation, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's, for us, for me, it's always this real push-pull of how much should we organize? Like, this is such a bad job. It's taxi driving wasn't even that great of a job, but it had some protections, and they're using our job to undermine that so much. It's so fragile. We know they're trying to get rid of us. We know the driverless cars are coming. I don't really believe that they're going to be coming as fast as they say they are. And also, right now we're paying for all the maintenance. We're paying for washing the car. We're paying for putting the gas in. Like, they're going to have to take care of that when they have a driverless car. So it's a lot of kind of externalized expenses that they are kind of shoving on us right now, and they're going to have to take care of. So yeah, I think it's really super important for us to get more organized in the face of that, and have a strong, if we could get a union, that'd be great, or something going so that we can all keep these jobs and keep our transportation systems functioning, and keep the protections and regulations that keep them safe and reasonable and well managed in place. So that's not just, you know, a wild, wild west of driverless cars running people over, wasting gas, undermining trains and buses, etc. That's the big, big, big picture. But yeah, it is a concern for many reasons.
Yeah, I wonder if David or Dolly, if either of you know from the TWU side of kind of how automation is coming up, or, you know, if there's a particular statement about it or approach to it that the Transport Workers Union has put together. And you're both on mute in case you're trying to be heard.
Dolly, you want to go first? You want to?
We still got Dolly on mute, so we're not sure if Dolly's trying to speak or.
David first. David
okay.
first.
Okay. Thanks, Dolly.
As far as the like murmurs or conversations among people at TWU, and just how examination of the industry in general, most of the big giants like Uber and Lyft are kind of moving away from rideshare in general. Like the idea of someone picking up, not moving away, but it's not that their biggest concern. They're throwing millions and millions of dollars, like, I mean, the new term, new modalities, at other options. Like, they're putting money into freight, putting money into like jump and bike share, and a lot of money into their autonomous vehicles. As like they're trying to like diversify their company so that like they don't need rideshare so much, as to so they can get ready for that jump to autonomous. That's as far as what I've heard. But as TWU's point of view, from like every conversation I've had with people like Nicholas Bedell, has been trying. The goal has been to try to get workers to own the actual industries they work in, like as is, and start worker co-ops and like buy their own work as opposed to having some kind of management, so they can actually have more control over the destiny, as opposed to like letting some larger company basically dictate what they do, and then like if they have a job next year or the year after, or so on and so forth.
Yeah, that sounds about pretty accurate to what I was going to say as well. I think that, yeah, everything is so autonomous on its own now anyway with cell phones that, yeah, I think they're moving away from cars, driverless cars in that kind of area altogether.
Yeah, it's also, that's cool to hear that TWU is in support of the move toward worker-owned cooperatives. One of the ways in which I have been seeing these kind of labor questions come up with transportation is I'm often asked to speak about or comment on equity in the biking and walking space. And what I've seen over the years is that there tends to be a lot more focus on the racial integration and like racial healing side of equity in those spaces when people are talking about that stuff, which is important, but at the same time, equity has a very economic meaning. And so it's been interesting to me how easy it is for people to talk about equity or ask questions about active transportation and equity, but really just leave the whole labor side out of it. And so it's been a little baffling seeing in the last year how much of a focus on equity and serving low-income communities has been part of the marketing for new mobility companies when they are corporations that operate as businesses doing the same kind of practices, and there's really nothing to do with worker equity usually being considered. So worker-owned cooperatives, on the other hand, are a model for building that worker equity into the very foundation of how business is running itself. So that's great to hear TWU is part of that work as it's developing around the country.
We're interested in that too, making co-ops. That's something that we're very much looking into.
And Alex, there was a question for you about the fight over classifying rideshare drivers as independent contractors versus employees. I know that's something that obviously, in your job, you're right at the crosshairs of that. Does Rideshare Drivers United have a particular, is that something that's in the Driver's Bill of Rights already, or work that's happening? And then there was also a question for you about what is your role with the group? Are you on staff, or are you a volunteer, or like a member?
Yeah, I'm a member, and it's all volunteer right now. So that's that. And in terms of my role, I do the press outreach and just a lot of the strategizing for it. And I'm mostly now, actually, I just got a full-time job, so I'm out of the game. So I'm still involved though, and I'm going to be working more as organizing the riders to help out on that side of it. In terms of the independent contractor question or employee question, that's really at the crux of the issue, because it's obviously a lot easier to organize if you're an employee. You can't be like a real union unless you are an employee through the NLRB. So, but we haven't actually taken that issue to our body yet to see how people feel about it. But what is happening is it's also sort of being forced on us, because in California, at least, this California Supreme Court issued a new standard for how you should be categorized as independent contractor or a employee. And it's a three-part, basically, like if you fail one of those three tests, then you should be classified as an employee. So just to keep it simple, like the one that I think is most obvious is if you're fulfilling the basic functions of the company, like not, you know, just fixing the window for a store or something, but actually like selling the things as the cashier, if you want to think about it that way, then that cashier can't just be like an independent contractor. It should be the an employee. So in that respect, like, yeah, we are totally, you know, fulfilling the basic functions of the companies. So we should be employees according to California Supreme Court law. And I think probably the big concern is that people don't want to be probably losing their ability to just turn the app on whenever they want to. That's probably the main reason people might want to continue to be independent contractors. We don't necessarily think it's that simple. I think you could be an employee and turn on the app whenever you want to. But right now, the problem is that we're getting the worst of both worlds. So we're not getting the protections of being an employee. We don't get unemployment if we get deactivated. We don't get all the things that California says if you have an employee, you have to give them. You have to give them paid time off or whatever. So we don't get any of those, but then they sort of try to treat us as much like an employee as they can, and in some ways cross that line of you know, I can't set, for example, if I'm an independent contractor, I should have a say in how much I charge per mile, right? Like if you don't just have plumbers who have to pay a certain amount of, you know, plumbers get to set their wages. If you're an independent contractor, you get to set that. We have no say. So we're kind of at getting the worst of both worlds, and we really need either the courts or the government to step in and say, hey, this is not fair, and this is not what an independent contractor designation is for. So yeah, that's kind of why it's such a hot button issue. And we haven't really said we want to be one or the other. We just want it to be reasonable so that we can make sure that we're making enough money if we are independent contractors. And that's why we want to talk to Governor Newsom, is to address that issue. That's one reason we really want to get his ear.
So I pasted a link into the chat box about the National Labor Relations Act, which was passed back in the 30s, which created the National Labor Relations Board, which is the federal agency that works in this space of unions and management. And there is a history of exclusion that was part of even passing the National Labor Relations Act. For anybody who's not familiar with that, farm workers and domestic workers were not included in that. And so it's part of the story of groups like the United Farm Workers that formed after that, you know, they didn't have union support. It was actually really groundbreaking for them to be bringing together workers who were excluded from having the kind of coverage that was established in the National Labor Relations Act. So I'm going to post a link in the chat box that talks about some of that farm workers being left behind aspect. But it's making me think about how in the past, this kind of exclusion from the right to organize or the right to form a union had to do with basically, it's very clear that the reason why farm workers and domestic workers were excluded from the National Labor Relations Act was because farm workers mostly aren't white, domestic workers mostly are women. So there were these, racialized and gendered reasons why, the politicians and the labor leaders at that time were able to come to this compromise. And I think it's interesting how the emergence of these new industries that really want to frame themselves as being super forward thinking or, innovative or, blah, 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 owning the future are actually replicating some of these older patterns in terms of leaving workers out of the equation, and I think it must be an interesting thing to be employed in this industry where you all are having to come up with some new rules as these new kind of opportunities and jobs emerge. So we have a good number of questions coming in here. So from Oscar in San Francisco, he says, I'm currently involved in a multi-ethnic, multiracial, cross-neighborhood mobility justice effort in SF. And they have a long list of equity demands. One of them is not only local hire, but also union jobs. So he's saying, how do we win that demand? We are currently talking to TWU 240A, and they have a new union president there who is a local homeboy that they grew up with in the neighborhood. So for the folks who are involved in TWU, do you have any advice about, just like making inroads or making connections with the local chapters?
As for, I mean, like, if I had any advice, the biggest thing is what comes to mind is communication is key in order for like success. Is like if you is getting people, once you get in contact with TW, working with TWU is that's TWU is mostly resources. That's what they always emphasize to us at the beginning, is that the union is just resources, the lawyers and advice. The union itself, the actual who's going to represent the union is the workers, and you have to like organize around that concept. That's like, oh, no one's representing me, I'm representing me, and get people there and meet more people that are like-minded like that, so that will be energized to be able to communicate and disseminate the information and disseminate that kind of energy to get everybody on the same page. So I think I answered the question, maybe.
Yeah, no, I think that's really helpful to emphasize that it's on the workers to organize. And I wonder, if David or Dolly or like both of you tag teaming, if you can explain for somebody, I think there's probably plenty of people on this call actually don't even know what's step one, what's the process of trying to form a union. Is that something you could just like real quick? I could give the overview I know, but I haven't actually been involved in doing the process. So I wonder if you could just like give the quick and dirty, like, okay, step one, what you just said, like talk to people.
Yeah, sure. I mean, as for me, I mean, my position was in communications. I was a dispatcher. So, and my family has a history of, my dad was a writer. My mother is also in communications. So, and my family's from the South, so we're big talkers. So for me, getting to know like kind of the temperature of everybody's kind of feelings about work was important to me, because I want to make sure that everybody's happy with what they're doing. And so when I kind of was getting this feedback from everybody about the same, and I was hearing the same stories over and over again from different people, that was kind of a linchpin. It showed to me that, hey, there's something that needs to be done. I mean, these were the same sort of issues that we were experiencing in DC. So I could see it from the same company in a different location. So for me, that was very good thing to be able to see that. But yeah, so I think obviously communication and finding a way to be able to talk to people, without any fear. So I think we developed, meeting times, and we also texted people that we trusted. And, we would use a lot of different techniques of like deleting texts or like contacting about things only in person. You have to be very savvy. It's politics. So you can't just like, I know everybody's interested in like throwing stuff down on, text and Google now. But I mean, as we have seen through Facebook and, all these people selling your data, and I'm sure Google does it too. I mean, these things, not to be trusted. So I think just one-on-one first-person interactions are the most valuable thing, and just really learning to figure out who is a strong leader, who is a good speaker, and somebody who, figure out the people who are going to form the coalition to initiate and then continue this drive, because it's an important process, and it is kind of like forming your own mini government, right? Between the people that you're working with. So
I was gonna say, to add to that, like in a nutshell, it's like the first, it's like Dolly was saying, you have to like find people that are like-minded and on the same page. But like, it's once you contact the union, the first thing you have to do is get enough people that are actually interested in organizing and getting them to sign I always like intend to join a union card. It's basically like, oh, I'm about this. Like that's like the wiggle like between that time and you need like I always forget the percentage. You need like is it 50% or 60% of staff at a site
50
has to sign the cards in order to contact National Labor Relations Board. And once you put that before you get to that point, that's like when you can lose your job. As soon as you get past that point, then you're like protected from
Good point.
from getting fired from your employer. And then after that, then the employer can recognize that you guys are trying to unionize, or they can fight it, and then you end up in court. If they recognize it, then you start to go through collective bargaining agreements. I think.
Yeah.
Concise.
Yeah, that's helpful. And yeah, and it really sounds like the important thing is just finding that core group that is going to carry the project forward. And I mean, I know the first attempt to organize isn't always successful. I have a friend who went through actually a couple unsuccessful attempts to get his coworkers at an ambulance company in New York organized. And it takes a lot of work and a lot of willingness to explain to folks who maybe are anti-union, because there's a lot of anti-union sentiment that has just been embedded in U.S. media and culture for a number of decades. And so I think that's part of what people have to grapple with too, right? It's like actually getting folks on the same page about what it means to be in a union, what are the benefits of that, and the tradition you're joining. I mean, I never, growing up in California and having a mother who is a public employee, I never really thought about unions. It was just like part of our life. It was how we got a discount to go to Disneyland because she would get tickets through the union. But it wasn't till I was an adult going to a protest at some point, and I saw someone with a sign that said "Proud daughter of a union member," and I was like, "Oh my gosh, that's me! I'm a proud daughter of a union member. Like I'm in this, this fight, in this thing. Like my mom got to retire with a pension because she was a union member." Nice. And I think that for folks who have only heard negative things about unions, they don't necessarily know about the fellowship and then the straight up equity that's part of being organized. So I definitely encourage, any of our participants who aren't as familiar with the history of the labor movement or how unions are really starting to get more and more of a boost today, not only unions, but also worker-owned cooperatives, and the fascinating work that people are doing across those spaces, trying to do hybrids and figure out how unions can move toward worker ownership as a model. I think it's pretty exciting time to see these connections.
Can I add one thing, Adonia? I was going to say there's also a great special on Netflix about the Black Panthers that are showing the just the ways that they organized.
What's do you know what the title is? I can Google it. But
called Vanguard. I think it's called Vanguard.
Yeah, Vanguard. That's right. Yeah, it's a great special. Okay. Yeah, but it's they were just talking about Huey Newton and really good special.
All right, cool. Yeah, we'll check that out. Well, as I was telling our panelists before we got started today, this hour was going to go by really fast. We have about 7 minutes to go here. Got a few more questions. I guess actually let's make this our last question. So how are you working in coalition with other organizations and movements? And are there challenges you faced in doing that coalition work? So, bringing together groups that have their own interests, that are finding ways to collaborate, and what have been some of the challenges?
Well, let's see. I've been doing some work with the transportation alternatives in New York City that involves a lot of safety work with the public roads, and we've done a lot of canvassing with people on the streets and just talking to people about what's going on in the city. And a lot of people don't want to hear about these things. But, you know, you just have to be persistent. I find that, you know, it's a political, you know, standpoint when you keep giving somebody the idea and then let it sit, and then maybe 5 minutes later come back and they'll see if they've kind of percolated and they'll be more receptive to your idea. Those sort of things.
Yeah, that makes sense. Being willing to return, you know, and continue to clarify.
Yeah.
Yeah, we haven't really gotten to that point yet. We're just starting to sort of think about that. So, and I guess our major concern is working together with people instead of kind of having you scratch your back, I scratch yours, whatever it is. You scratch my back, I scratch yours. Instead of having sort of like quid pro quo, like you do this, I do that. It's more like, where do our interests align and how can we work together on them? So we're just sort of starting that process of trying to reach out to groups and identify groups who would be there. Like, maybe can we show up? I mean, for instance, when that thing went down in Monrovia, where Monrovia is giving millions of dollars to Lyft to have them take over a lot of their public transportation, there had to be, you know, a city council meeting. And if you can get, you know, 20 Lyft drivers there, that can make a big difference to whether or not that happens, whether or not that goes down, and what it looks like. So, and, you know, we're just trying to identify who are the leaders and reach out to them now and find the common ground. That's all I would say on that right now for us.
Brilliant.
I'd add, like, usually when working with other groups trying to find common ground, it's usually like every time I would talk to someone that wasn't like pro union or like, oh no, I believe in like meritocracy, like I'll work hard and get mine, and which I guess is an American concept, but I always try to like bring home that it's like the phrase of the rising tide lifts all boats. It's like if we work together and make it good for all of us, then we'll all do better. And that usually kind of helps.
All right. Well, this is I feel like we've just scratched the surface, and this conversation has made me realize how much, you know, there could be done for folks who are working in transportation and mobility justice to just help solidify these connections with organizing and labor. And I'm really excited to talk to you all more, but we have to close out this discussion for now. So I'm going to go ahead and do my little closing spiel here. The next Transformative Talk is going to be a family tea time, which is one of our smaller, more intimate conversations that are by RSVP. That is going to be on Wednesday, March 20th, so next Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. Pacific. So that would be 4:30 p.m. Eastern. The topic is Black, Indigenous, people of color who work in government, healing trust and relationships. So it'll be people reflecting on how they've navigated all of those things. If you want to sign up for that or learn more, you can contact me at adonia@mobilityjustice.org, which I am going to drop into the chat box here, so you can reach out, ask questions, or RSVP. You can also go to the untokening.org/webinars website to see information about upcoming Transformative Talks. And once again, thank you so much, Dolly, David, and Alex, for being part of this Transformative Talks webinar on organizing new mobility workers. Your work is much appreciated, and please let us know how Untokening or People for Mobility Justice or Pueblo can support what you're doing. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay.